Ladies and gentlemen, welcome this evening. Would you please, before we begin, turn off all electronic equipment, and please rise to welcome Robin Kane and Darren and Susan Miller as they sing America the Beautiful. Thank you very much, Robin, Darren, and Susan. We'd like to welcome you to the Freedom Library 18th Annual Awards Forum featuring President Thomas Jefferson and Chief Justice John Marshall. Good evening. My name is Bill Gresser, and I will be your Master of Ceremonies for this evening. We'd like to thank all the sponsors who are listed in your program for their assistance in helping to put on tonight's program. And now, here is the founder and director of the Freedom Library, Howard Blitz.
Thank you, Bill. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our 18th Annual Awards Forum. Tonight's event could not take place without a whole lot of help. And I personally want to thank Darwin Stifler, Brenda Perez, Ty Torres, Mark Leone, Mike Menace, Jose Caceres, all of District 1 for allowing us not only to use this facility, but helping us out in manning the lights and the technology involved here. So I really appreciate it. I also want to thank Dominic McIntyre for running the video up here, and the Gila Ridge and Gova High School students that have come out to help us tonight. Really appreciate all your help tonight. I'd like to thank Jim Conley for giving his time. Jim couldn't make it tonight because he's under the weather, but he is the gentleman that facilitated the economics class that was put on by the Freedom Library this past spring. And if we could have the house lights come up just a minute, I'd like to recognize Margaret Geis, Nancy Tucker, and Stephen Ball, who participated in that program. Could you guys stand wherever you're sitting so we can recognize you? These individuals take time out of their busy lives to learn about economics this past spring. And that's what the Freedom Library is all about. It's all about education and helping people learn and understand ideas on liberty. Classes have been going on since 1997. And in that time, the Freedom Library has awarded 76 scholarships for a total of $75,000 over that 18-year period, 17-year period. And I want to thank you, the Yuma community, and people from around this country for helping support the Freedom Library Education and Scholarship Program. Thank you very much. Classes will start again in the fall. August 26th, the economics class will start again. August 28th, the U.S. Constitution class will begin again. We will have a class in Somerton that will be led by Luis Eckley, teaching it in Spanish. We will have also a class out in Mohawk Valley School for any individuals that live out in that area. So the whole idea, again, is to make these programs available. They're free of charge. There's only a $30 refundable deposit for the textbook that's used. And we'd like to also honor Stephen and Nancy tonight because they're the scholarship recipients for this past spring, and they will be traveling to the Foundation for Economic Education week-long seminar this summer. I also want to definitely thank Bill Gresser for being our MC tonight. Thank you, Bill. And don't forget, we've got books for sale out in the lobby. You can have your picture taken with Mr. Marshall and Mr. Jefferson tonight on your way out. And now I'm going to return control to Bill so that he can introduce our very, very special guest to you. Bill?
Once again, we want to thank the sponsors who allow the students from the Yuma area schools to attend this performance, and also the businesses that provide the opportunity to draw prizes. In addition, we want to especially thank you, the audience. Tonight, you will have the opportunity to watch and listen to Thomas Jefferson and John Marshall discuss the balance of power between the executive and judiciary branches of the government, highlighted in the U.S. Constitution. And later on in the program, you, the audience, will have an opportunity to submit questions on a card that you were handed when you were entered into the auditorium. When you get your questions, please hand the card to any one of the ushers who will circulate throughout the auditorium so that they may run them up to the lectern. This question and answer period will take place after our two distinguished guests make their presentation and have a little debate. At the close of tonight's performance, you will have an opportunity to have your picture taken with the gentleman for only $5. Be sure to check the opportunity draw table on your way out to see if you were a lucky winner. And now for the program. At age 9, Thomas Jefferson studied Latin, Greek, and French. At the age of 16, he entered the College of William and Mary. And at age 19, studied law for 5 years under the tutelage of George Wythe. At 25, he was elected to the Virginia House of Burgesses, what we call the state legislature today. And at 31, he wrote the widely circulated Summary View of the Rights of British America. Thomas Jefferson became a delegate to the Second Continental Congress at age 32, and he wrote the Declaration of Independence at age 33. He became the governor of Virginia, succeeding Patrick Henry at age 36. He has served in Congress, has been a minister to France, served as the first Secretary of State under George Washington and his administration, all by the time he was 46 years old. He was elected Vice President of the United States at age 53, and 4 years later was elected the third President of the United States. He purchased the landmass known as the Louisiana Purchase during his first term in office, and at age, he retired to his home in Monticello. At age 80, he helped President Monroe shape the Monroe Doctrine. The following year, he created the University of Virginia. In 1826, Thomas Jefferson died on the 50th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, the same day that John Adams died. As a child, John Marshall was mainly homeschooled by his father. However, He did spend 1 year at Campbell Academy in Westmoreland County, where future U.S. President James Monroe was his classmate. John Marshall joined the military at age 20, and in the fight to secure America's independence from Great Britain, he was appointed Lieutenant Governor with the Culpeper Mountain Minutemen, which was later absorbed by the Continental Army's 11th Regiment of Virginia that defeated the British Royal Army at the Battle of Great Bridge. It freed Virginia from British rule. Marshall fought at the Battle of Brandywine and Germantown, and George Washington made him his chief legal officer at Valley Forge. John Marshall left the military in 1780 to study law, and like Jefferson, was a student of George Wythe. That same year, Marshall opened his own law practice. From 1782 to 1795, he was a member of the Virginia House of Delegates, lost a race for city council in 1785, but became city recorder acting as a magistrate on the Richmond Hustings Court, presiding over small criminal and civil court cases. He established himself as a fair and modest man who communicated clearly and based his decisions on the common good. In 1788, John Marshall became a delegate to the Virginia State Convention, helping to ratify the United States Constitution. He was a very powerful advocate for replacing the Articles of Confederation with the Constitution. Marshall was elected to a seat in the U.S. House of Representatives in 1799 and was appointed Secretary of State under John Adams in 1800. In 1801, John Marshall became the 4th Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, serving until his death at the age of 79. Over the course of his 34-year term as Chief Justice, John Marshall delivered more than 1,000 decisions, penned more than 500 opinions, and played a pivotal role in establishing the Supreme Court's role as the ultimate authority in interpreting the U.S. Constitution. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to the President of the United States, Thomas Jefferson, and Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, John Marshall.
Good number of citizens who are eager to know more about the workings of our government.
Well, I'm delighted that we have this opportunity to finally travel so far west of the Appalachian Mountains, our own Blue Ridge in Virginia, and that you might in particular see what I have discussed with you for many, many years. The beauty described to me of this particular land so far west by our cousin, Captain Meriwether Lewis, Lieutenant William Clark, the success of their expedition of great service to our nation. And most importantly, to see so many people now already settled here. And most important, for I know the two of us, the system of education that might continue to remind them of the history of our nation, and that we hope that history will continue to be a beacon light for the rest of the world, particularly in our system of government and in our Constitution, over which I know we have somewhat a difference of opinion, do we not?
Honest differences, I'm sure.
Honest indeed, both convicted, and I dare say perhaps honest as we are family. Justice Marshall is my second cousin, once removed. Both of our mothers were from the Randolph family in Virginia. a family that has an ancient pedigree going all the way back to Scotland, related to Robert the Bruce, are they not?
I've always taken great pride in the Keith side of our family, and the family motto that the truth will win out.
The truth will win out. Well, I've always believed that that one's ancestry is not so much by which they should be judged, but rather the merit of their talent. So with respect to our families, let anyone ascribe merit to that should they choose. Our interest is to pique your talent and your curiosity, particularly to hear from you and your questions, which I understand are being gathered here as we meet. Well, Your Honor, who should go first to reflect upon our Constitution, to provide, if you will, somewhat of a foundation for that which we agree upon and that which we disagree over?
Well, if we consult the order in which the various three branches were constituted, as I recall, the executive and the legislative branches came into being first, and then subsequently the Supreme Court was provided for by the action of Congress, so perhaps you should go first.
Yes, but that would rather be ill-mannered of me, would it not, to take the first step above on the dais, and then to expect that I should provide the first voice of opinion. For there is a difference of opinion between us, so who should recognize the ultimate authority, is it?
There is a difference, and I imagine there'll be adequate time for the both of us to offer our opinions. And I suppose I am your junior in age.
You are so. Indeed, you are somewhat younger than I am, so if you will, age shall take a rest and allow youth and perhaps a distinct beauty of physiognomy to purport the first opinion.
Well, I will speak first, my cousin will speak secondly, and perhaps the audience at large will have the last word, sir. The subject before us is a very full and interesting one, and perhaps I might best begin by giving you some reasons why I came to believe that it was essential to replace the miserable fabric of our previous Articles of Confederation, which had limped along during the Revolution, loosely aligned 13 very independent colonies under an indifferent common head. And the experiences that led me to believe that a constitution, a more perfect union, would be necessary to secure to ourselves and to our posterity all the things we had won through hard labor in the revolution against Great Britain. I find that my 5 years of service in the Army were very influential on developing my political views. When I left my home to be a lieutenant in the Culpeper Militia, I was surrounded by my fellow Virginians from the 3 neighboring counties. I thought myself a Virginian. But by the time I had suffered through the cruel winter at Valley Forge and had become associated in my military duties with young men from all different parts of the 13 states, I began to realize that whether we were from Virginia or Connecticut or New York or Massachusetts, all of us were united in a common cause felt to be most dear, that we would sacrifice everything valuable, even our lives, in the obtaining of our independence from British tyranny. It was that service in the Army that confirmed me in the belief that America, not Virginia, but America, was my country. I can tell you, from serving in the Army, how deplorably imbecilic the disjointed efforts of the Continental Congress were to try and provide even the most rudimentary food and supplies necessary to keep an army in the field for the very success of our cause. It was a truly, it was an imperfect system. And throughout the war, not only was there imbecility shown from time to time, there was a total incompetency from the authorities in the Continental Congress. They could not find the means to carry out the responsibilities that had been given to them. And it was not the Articles of Confederation, but rather the willpower of the Army itself in the field, along with a seasonable alliance with the French to support us in our cause, that gained us independence, despite the Articles of Confederation. After the Revolution, we saw further proofs of the inadequacy of a loosely gathered league of independent states. There was much domestic unrest and complicated frictions to be seen throughout the land. The first problem was the Continental Congress had no support or respect from foreign governments. As a result, whenever we sent ministers abroad to negotiate treaties of trade and peace and commerce, they would not be given any respect because the foreign nations did not respect our national government. Trade was languishing. The very pensions promised to the soldiers who fought so bravely in the field were not guaranteed because the Congress had no means or power of the purse to fulfill its obligations. The states were recommended to supply the necessary money, but no state wished to be the first to comply with requisitions, lest it would be seen to be doing more than any other states that were holding back. And in this deplorable state of affairs, the people themselves, disaffected with the difficulties at hand, even in peacetime, began raising armed mobs which marched on a state legislature, which marched on and suspended the meetings of a different Supreme Court of another state, and which tried to take over federal armories in armed insurrection against authority. Let us remember that liberty does not mean the absence of laws, for the absence of laws is anarchy. Something had to be done. And in due course, with Virginia providing the lead, I am happy to say, a convention was gathered in Philadelphia, famous to us all, and they came up with a more perfect union to establish justice and to ensure domestic tranquility, and I might add, to get some respect from foreign governments, which would be less likely to invade us in the future to collect their debts. And what emerged from this meeting in Philadelphia was a fully formed government with legislative and executive and judicial powers. A government which had powers that would secure us domestic happiness and foreign respect. A government which had the necessary means to carry its powers into effect. For not even the best designed government on paper is of any use if it has no power to achieve the ends for which it was established. We must ask ourselves, is such power granted necessary? And is it guarded? And is it limited? Our new balanced Constitution gives us such limited government and a compound republic, a blending together of the states and of the new federal authority. This gives me hope for the future. With a federal constitution operating consistently with the state authorities, we will have a political bedrock for our future salvation. Let us always remember that united, we are strong. Divided, we fall.
I thank you, Mr. Chief Justice. So very well put, so very concise, and with much that I certainly agree upon. And I think that at an early age, I considered only Virginia to be my country. It did not take long when we heard from the north in Massachusetts, and then from Pennsylvania, New York, and below us, the Carolinas and Georgia, that indeed not a one of us could stand alone without the support of the others. And so, as Colonel Patrick Henry was wont to remark, at that very first Congress held in Philadelphia, September of 1774, and there before the delegates of all our sister colonies, Henry said, I realize now I am no longer solely a Virginian, but now I am an American. I must say, if you will, Your Honor, that when we dismounted out of doors and I took off my riding boots and put on my shoes, I considered that I might be observed by the public to be musty and dusty, perhaps peculiarly apparelled from our journey. I conjured up an apology until, as we walked down the aisle here, I gazed upon a number of these citizens and thought to myself, why should I apologize for the way I am dressed? I've always believed in dressing for comfort, but you overwhelm me in that regard. I now see that Mr. Chief Justice and myself are more formally attired in what we have always known as a gentleman's suit of clothes, unless you think that I've meandered into the subject of fashion and style. That is precisely my point. We often preoccupy our opinions, do we not, based solely upon what is novel, what is in the air. We worry about whether we will conform with that opinion, whether we will conform in dress. But I hope some of you have read, as I have written, in matters of style simply swim with the current, but in matters of principle stand like a rock. Mr. Chief Justice Marshall and I stand here this evening that we might not forget the principles upon which our nation has been founded. And yes, particularly to realize there is a difference of opinion between Justice Marshall and myself as to which branch of our government should have the last statement with respect to public upheaval, with respect to questions of our government, with respect to the laws that are created in the legislative body. Should that be then judged by those who are seated by appointment rather than those who are elected of the people? My answer to this is that we never forget as Americans a difference of opinion must never be a difference of principle. That we must never forget that though we were Virginians, though we were New Yorkers, from Massachusetts and Georgia, no, we were all Americans. And that as we were referred to, a radical rabble by a monarchical system of government, that government of privilege and landed gentry and appointment, 3,000 miles removed, we showed that nobility, that a radical rabble was civilized, bringing 13 individual nations together. 13 individual nations, each and every one disparate and different in the predominance of their own religious opinions, the predominance of those who owned land and those who did not. We brought us all together, not only for our common safety, not only for the common defense, but most importantly, for the common good of all. The maintenance of the general welfare. That, never to be forgotten, a founding principle of our nation. And I hope that you may realize as well that I authored that declaration, which provides not only for us and generations yet unborn, but for the rest of the world, those principles over which we shed our blood in the American Revolution. The first and foremost part of our declaration is the pronouncement of our philosophy, that we are e pluribus unum, one out of many. The second part of that declaration are the grievances each and every one of those colonies felt distinctly unto themselves, and yet realized we felt all together. And the third part of our declaration is the compact, which seals 13 individual nations coming together, e pluribus unum. And yes, the remarkable Articles of Confederation, which came out of the first official Congress of our nation, declared on the 2nd day of July, 1776 in Virginia. As you know, in Philadelphia, as you know, I'm referring, of course, to the day we voted for independence. Upon that day, we were no longer the Continental Congress. We were the new Congress of these United States, and 2 days later, we sealed that compact on the 4th of July with a successful vote on our Declaration of American Independence. Out of that grew our Articles of Confederation, a confederation of 13 nations coming together. And yes, though it was loosely constructed, though it had no immediate system of taxation, though there was no president of these states united, but rather a president of the Congress solely, I still felt it was of a venerable fabric. It ought not to be tampered with. But as you know, Your Honor, it was Mr. Madison, James Madison, the most luminous mind I've ever known, who convinced me over 3,000 miles during the time that I served our nation as an ambassador to France. Mr. Madison, in the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, convinced me that a strengthening of those Articles of Confederation was necessary. Necessary for our continued safety and defense, and as well for the maintenance of the general welfare of the American people, no matter where they reside. Again, no matter whether they are in Massachusetts, Virginia, the Carolinas, or Georgia. This is on behalf of each and every American, and that the further established and secured by the preamble of our Constitution. The most remarkable beginning to a system of government in the history of mankind, and our Constitution, the shortest document of its kind in human history, creating a government to check its own power, and the most influential of the three branches, in my opinion, the legislative branch. That branch elected by whom? The people. That first sentence in our Constitution, we the people, is of course the propagating sentence of our Constitution. Who are the people? You all have just heard me pronounce it. It refers to all Americans. And yet, Justice Marshall and myself know, as we gaze out over all of you here this night, that as far as we know, the women folk in this room are not the people. You have no voice. Vote. No voice. You cannot be elected to government. Anyone of color in this room, if they be enslaved, mulatto, or of a particular hue from a foreign land, you as well have no vote, cannot be elected to our government. A white male, 21 years of age or older in this room, who does not hold property, has no vote. And a white male, 21 years of age or older in this room, who may hold property, and yet is mortgaged, has no vote. You must be a white male, 21 years of age or older, and a freeholder, able to pass that property in fee simple to another, to be protected and defended by 9/10 of our law, that which we have inherited from Great Britain, for the safety, protection, and defense of person and property. And thereby you may recognize how the liberty we proclaim appears to the rest of the world to be constricted. But lest you feel that we are bound in perpetuity by these restrictions, oh nay, we have already shown the rest of the world that we are a revolutionary people on behalf of all. And therefore, there's no time to despair, but to continue the arguments, to continue our differences of opinion, to continue to seek the resolution in compromise and resolution for the common good entirely. For indeed, it was worse. One of the requisites, though changed in the last several years, was simply that you had to be Protestant Christian. Does anyone here know who changed all that? I take the honor, Mr. Chief Justice, as you know, in offering the Statute of Virginia for religious freedom. So we do continue in advance on behalf of all the people. And so therefore I'm happy that we have heard already from Justice Marshall that you have provided me the opportunity to speak my mind. But we look the more so to hear from you and the questions that you have. So if you will, Mr. Chief Justice, I thank you for this moment that you have allowed.
And let us both make the most of it, I dare say.
Indeed. Might we pronounce differences betwixt us already, that they may be the judge?
I scarcely know where to begin.
Well, I provided that I consider the legislative body to be the ultimate authority, for therein the laws are made, the true representation of the people, though unfortunately representation of the white male freeholder in this room this evening. Not all. Do you think that that representation ought to be overseen by a greater authority, say the judiciary?
Oh, no. I would never claim that the judiciary has superior power over the other two branches or superior power over the people. Indeed, what is it that allows us to trust our judiciary? There are two things that give us faith in the judiciary. First, the manner of their appointment. That is to say, that unlike a member of the House of Representatives candidate, or unlike a candidate for the presidency, judges for federal positions are not obliged to go out and campaign and treat the people to free liquor, to curry their favor, or to make promises or broad statements to become friendly with them. This is not the means by which a judge can hope to seek a seat on the federal court. We do not beg and pander for the position. In the end, to become a member of the Supreme Court of the United States, it requires the recommendation by nomination of an elected official, the president, and then the advice and consent of the Senate, which is uniformly seen to be the senior member portion of the legislature. You must be older to be a senator. You are chosen by the state governments, as we both understand it, to become U.S. senators. And it is that refining crucible of their consent that will finally settle on who is a justice on the Supreme Court of the United States. I would argue that the manner of our appointment makes us more independent of whimsy or of promises to be kept. And we can devote ourselves to the following of the law. It is the unique position of the judiciary to have such a responsibility. A judge functions best when he operates freely and apart from political faction or seeking the public will. I remember one case in which I was involved of a most fatiguing kind, where I could have saved myself a great deal of trouble by merely following the public will instead of the public law. But I know my path of duty. It is to expound upon the law, to protect the law, for that is the surest guarantee of our future. The rule of law, not the rule of fallible men.
I stand, if you would allow me, Mr. Chief Justice, with the contest. You incur the faith and the trust of the people upon the judiciary, which you say indeed are by appointment, thereby free, without the influence of the people themselves, to attend to pure and simple justice, to follow a nation of law, not simply by the will of the people. And yet I ask you, sir, is that faith and trust still to be upheld when we may recognize appointment may be through political opinion, and thereby influenced in the appointment by political faction, and devised thereby through political faction in the certain judgment of the law? Or do we have a greater faith and trust for the people, those who elect their representatives to create the law, and thereby assuring them that they hold the reins of their government? For surely that is the foundation of our system of government, of, by, and for the people. Was not Mr. Locke precise and correct when he said no government anywhere at any time will long survive unless it recognizes it receives its just powers to govern from the governed, understood by a school child, free of any lofty sophisms? If there are no people, then a government would govern over no one. Is that what you prefer? To deny the recognition of the people once they make the law that is their law? Should it then now go to another authority to decide whether the law is valid when the people have already spoken, when the majority proceeds in the correct fashion of a democratical republican form of government to show the will of the people, while at the same time the necessity of a democratic republican system of government, the majority responsibility to protect and defend the inherent rights of the minority. This is our great difference of opinion, Mr. Chief Justice. Does the faith rest in the judiciary by appointment, or does the faith rest in the people?
Well, when we consider that the people elect the president, and when we consider that the state legislatures elected by the people choose the senators, we can take comfort in the much higher bar that is placed upon a judge attaining his seat than we can. He's been triple distilled, sir, to reach that position. And I would say this too, that a judiciary which can be independent of faction and changing majority wins will not create the same mistake as the pure democracies of Greece, who would order by mass demonstration the death of Socrates on one day, and then on the next day decide to put up a statue to it. You cannot have such instability. You must have the rule of law to leaven the changing and transient whims of the people. And it is the independence of the judiciary from the short-term views, the long-term view that the judiciary can take, that will protect our long-term interests.
Is not the transient opinion of the people the purpose of the Senate serving a longer period of representation than the House, to have a greater knowledge of what has been passed, in order that the people might not become so fickle to forget what has happened but 2 or 4 years ago, 6 years, allowing a greater eye to what has transpired, and thereby the very same concern of maintaining a consistency in providing the essential principles for the law, stability, protection, safety, and defense of the people? Or is it to be judged by that body of appointment whose only duty should be with respect to conflicts of law, not an over-authority above the law, say to even suggest its repeal?
Well, let me indeed put your mind at ease. For it is the duty of a judge or a justice not to decide political questions. That is for elected officials, but rather for us to decide individual cases. As you well know, you are an able lawyer. If an individual receives an injury, he must have means of redress. And there are issues of private property that must be protected. There are issues of the sanctity of contracts. There are issues of the freeness and fairness of trade. All of these things come within the purview of the judiciary for specific cases to protect particular individuals from the tyranny of the majority in some cases, or from bad faith and bad actions by some other minority. It is the duty of a judge to decide individual cases, not political questions.
I might remind you that when you refer to the fact that I am an attorney, yes, though I practiced for 7 years. I gave up the practice, as you recall, at the beginning of the Revolution, when the monarchy closed down our courts of justice. But I remind you that my practice was based upon the teaching I received from the very same gentleman who taught you the law, George Whitney, there in Williamsburg.
An estimable gentleman.
No two individuals could have been better prepared in a knowledge of the foundation of the law, and particularly to know that the law is living and breathing, Justice Marshall. It grows with the experience of the people. It is but common sense a child of 14 cannot wear the same clothes at the age of 40. Our laws and institutions grow as we grow as the people. Otherwise, we should expect to go back to the ages of the darkest ignorance to find the greatest improvement. That nothing could be improved upon or better than what has already been adjudged. If that was the case, sir, then indeed the white male 21 years of age or older who is a freeholder here has the final say in the future through generations yet unborn. I would not deny that it is the purpose of the justices to protect and defend the law and to provide it applicable to the people, but cannot that judgment be swayed by the sole opinion of the justice, for what he believes is the interpretation of the particular law by his own political attentions, rather than to hold his judgment in his interpretation to what is best for the people entirely.
No one justice on the court can make a decision that is not supported by a majority. And I know the friends of your particular political persuasion have taken great comfort in the fact that the Congress, by the way, the Congress can set the number of justices that sit on the United States Supreme Court, have given Mr. Jefferson the option of adding an additional justice. So we will now have 7, and it will require 4 properly constituted quorum to come to any particular decision.
Yes, and I hope to see that grow, Mr. Chief Justice, as our nation grows. After all, we are no longer just 13 states and commonwealths. We now have 18 states. We admitted Ohio during the first years of my first administration, and then happily 18 and 12 to admit Louisiana. We now have more than 8 cities above 20,000 in population. We now have a national population and 10 million people. But of course, the ultimate authority based upon our judiciary by appointment should grow as our nation grows. And yes, I concur that the general opinion by vote on the judiciary is still most relevant thereby.
We both mentioned George Wythe, and for good reason. And I would remind you of one of his most telling statements, because I know you fully embrace his wisdom as a professor of the law, as it is best suited for American practice. And it was George Wythe who gave the responsibility to the judiciary to safeguard against infringements made on the Constitution by the legislative branch. It was George Wythe, our esteemed professor, who said, should the legislature go beyond the Constitution, and he meant then the written Constitution of Virginia, but I would say it applies to the written Constitution of the United States. Should a legislature transgress against such a Constitution, the judiciary must be upright, stand up and say to the legislature, there is the Constitution. There is the limit of your power. And there is a better chance that an independent judiciary will remind a wayward legislature of any such transgressions than the wayward legislatures themselves.
And yet, Mr. Marshall, may I remind you that Mr. Wythe also believed in the growth of the law and amendments to constitutions. And so therefore, the judiciary is to suggest that the will of the people as exemplified through the representative body is to go beyond the Constitution than what is most proper, rather than to put a halt for what is a suggested opinion of transgression, is to suggest that indeed there should then be a convention of the people so interested in proceeding to improve their Constitution to allow for amendments to that Constitution.
And that is a formal process by which we can, with due deliberation, consider amendments. Is not history the volume of human experience? Is not experience the parent of wisdom? And if we mean to change our Constitution, let us not do it by stray, ordinary statutes of a giddy legislature. Let us do it, as you say, through the formal method as prescribed within the written instrument itself, for judicious amendments, if you will. And in that way, we can adopt and adapt our written Constitution to the various crises in human affairs as experience would best suggest, so that our written Constitution will endure for ages to come, as we hope the Union will. And I am really interested in putting a question to you. There are some who say that you are a speculative philosopher in political matters, and I have heard it said that by some interesting mathematical calculation known to yourself, you have determined that it would be good for us as a nation to throw out the Constitution every 19 years and replace it with a new one? Can you give credit to this peculiar philosophy?
I can, and with correction. I said not, nor written in kind, 19 years, but rather every generation or so. It is the duty of the people to continue to attend and inspect their system of laws and government, that it continue to grow as they grow as the people. After all, revolutions are to be expected, are they not? In the political world, as they are now natural in the physical. And what means a few lives lost if we have made a greater advance for the improvement of the condition of mankind? What is the purpose of government but to protect and defend the people? Is that what a few, one more than another, select? Or the people, as the people judge it ought to be? That is the essence of revolution, Mr. Chief Justice. That is the essence of what allows the people to continue to amend their system of laws, that it keeps a pace with them. And I do not suggest that revolution ought always be rebellion and ought always be bloodshed or revolt. No, but rather revolving back to the essential elements of liberty and freedom. For after all, the tree of liberty must be continually refreshed with the blood of patriots as well as of tyrants. And I think thereby the pen much more powerful than the sword.
Well, I will say and give you full credit when I think on documents such as the Declaration of Independence and the Statute of Virginia for Religious Freedom that you have very freely spilled your ink in the cause of liberty, while others of us were ready to spill our blood on the battlefields that defined the future of our nation. And as speaking of the Declaration of Independence, there are 2 points that I remember rather distinctly that may be appropriate for us, where we can all fully grasp the importance of the Declaration of Independence. There is a time, it says, where governments should not be changed for light or transient causes. And that is why, as I feel I've heard you to say, we should not change the Constitution except by formal amendment as provided for. And the other thing harkens back to the judiciary, and I thought you made a very telling point in your declaration of grievances against the tyrant king. For from your pen, as I understand it, came this marvelous phrase that one of the tyrannies of the king was making the judiciary dependent on his will alone for their offices and for the payment of their salaries. And this speaks to the need for an independent judiciary as eminently as anyone ever has, and I thank you, sir, for that ringing declaration for the importance of protecting the judiciary.
Mr. Chief Justice, it is the precise idea of an independent judiciary in its fact or in its fiction which I am going to question. Whether indeed the judiciary stands independent unto itself, or whether it is the device of political heresies. And therefore, yes, I am concerned for the future of this nation, not for the progress of the people and their representative body. Nay, rest you assured, I am not a Hobbesian. I do not believe that man's essential nature is corrupt and deceitful. Nay, indeed, I am Lockean, that man has a sense of beneficence and concern for his fellow man.
What a happy thought.
Indeed, it is a happy thought, is it not, Mr. Marshall?
You have said, have you not, that as we grow older, we must change our suit of clothes?
Oh, yes, a child of 14 cannot wear the same clothes at the age of 40 to benefit his growth and the growth of the people.
My point of it is, why do we wear clothes, sir? Because we have lost our innocence. And as Publius said in the Federalist Papers, and I have a suspicion as to who Publius really is, a gentleman we both highly esteem, he said that if men were angels, no government would be necessary. But government is necessary, for men are not angels. And that is why we must rely on the rule of law than merely the rule of fallible men.
And that the opinion of but an appointed few upon a high bench who consider that they have the last opinion and last authority, or the opinion of the people themselves. Rest you assured, citizens, do not forget your government is created for one distinct purpose, or one distinct purpose only, to protect you from injury by one and the other. Otherwise, to leave you free to pursue your own industry and your own improvement. Now, I suggest, is then the protection, safety, and defense provided your government solely on behalf of the white male 21 years of age or older who is a freeholder here tonight? That is the question I place in your hands and through the hands of future generations. That is a question that must be answered by your representatives, or if you so desire, to be answered by a few perhaps political appointments and a sense of independency on behalf of the people at large.
Gentlemen, let that be the last word at this part of the program.
Well, I should not suggest that I ought to have the last word.
Oh, you will not, sir,
I
because
Oh, no,
I will be on the bench long after you are no longer president.
no, the public will have the last word as we propose to
Delightful.
solicit their questions. If you gentlemen would like to avail yourself of a seat for a few moments, you'll find that there's water. You've probably never seen this before, but it comes now in containers. It's very pure. It's something that you never saw before because, well, you know when you died and they didn't have them then.
No, but I dare say this is perhaps through the ingenuity of the people and not an appointed bench of attorneys.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you have some questions, if you would please raise your hands and the ushers will pick up the questions. While they're doing that, gentlemen, I wonder, the President of the United States is elected by popular vote. The members of Congress are elected by popular vote. The members of the Supreme Court are appointed, but the members of the House, which somewhat resembles the House of Lords, I must say, are appointed or selected by the individual state Congress.
You mean to say the American Senate? The members of the Senate?
What did I say?
The House.
I'm sorry, members of the Senate are selected by the individual state legislatures. Is that a good system, or should the senators at some point be elected by popular vote? How would you see that?
If you would allow, Mr. Chief Justice, I would consider, sir, that if we may at some time achieve an educated citizen body, and by that I mean solely the opportunity for every child in our nation to attend to school, well then, yes, I would suggest that even the state legislatures might desist in electing the senators, and the people in each one of our states and Congress have that opportunity, being thereby so informed and the further enlightened to cast a vote that would reflect their education. Now, that would also mean, in my opinion, that the education be open unto the female as well as the male, and the poor as well as the wealthy.
Mr. Chief Justice, do you agree with that?
I've heard it said that it constitutes the better part of Mr. Jefferson's pride that he is ever willing to run far ahead of the times in which he lives. Those are rather interesting speculations from a speculative philosopher. But I must say I'm somewhat surprised to hear you advocate the direct election of United States senators when I reflect that so many of your friends take great comfort in the knowledge that senators sent to the national capital are sent by the state legislatures as the agents of those various state sovereignties. Now, as we know, in what Publius has referred to in the Federalist Papers as a compound republic, the federal government has been given enumerated and special powers. Those powers it has been given, it has the supreme authority for those powers. But we are a compound republic. The national union is made up of states which form its constituent parts. And these state governments are, for some purposes, sovereign, and for other purposes, subordinate. And one way in which the character of the state sovereignties can be preserved under our new compound federal system is to give the individual state legislatures the opportunity to choose two agents to represent that particular state at the federal level in the federal legislative branch. So I am rather interested. I think many of your close friends and political acquaintances would be quite interested to hear your remarkable assertion that the sovereignty of the states should be tempered in this manner by giving over to the people at large the direct election of senators.
I am concerned, though, very much in favor of the influence, particularly the distinct and immediate influence of the jurisprudence of any state as it is resulting from its various counties and its kind, to know best the protection, safety, and defense and interest of its own citizen body. But that does not mean that what may be suffice for the state at present cannot be improved upon in the future for the maintenance of the general good. Good Lord, as I have ever been in favor of states' rights, particularly with reflection to the drafting of the, and I have not made this public, and I'm afraid now perhaps the cat is out of the bag, the drafting of the Kentucky resolutions, and I think you always knew I had my hand on that.
I suspect.
Yes, and Mr. Madison, the Virginia resolutions as well.
Yes, but
That's
I think he
suggesting
has
that an act of the federal government is unconstitutional when it denies the American citizen, in no matter what state they reside, to hold their opinion freely, to express their opinion freely, to engage news writers to express their opinion freely in the newspapers. When that is unconstitutional, then yes, a state should rise up and seek a redress for such grievance, but it does not mind, and it does not mean that a state would have an inherent right, let's say, to break from the contract of this nation. That is the reason why Mr. Madison and I proposed the resolutions as a solemn protest, that it did not imply a state could rise up in insurrection, form alliances with others, which, as you know, is distinct in our Constitution as disallowed.
Disallowed, prohibited expressly
Indeed,
both by the letter and the spirit of that document.
Thank you, gentlemen. We know that the government as it was formed called for the separation of church and state. Was that meant to keep government out of the church or not establish a national church, or was it more designed to keep God out of government? And in that, what influence did religion have towards the establishment of the judiciary?
I would like to hear the Chief Justice's opinion on that, but I know he would allow me the first answer as the author of the Statute of Virginia for religious freedom. And that is, as he well knows, before our American Revolution, we were not only governed by one royal family, generation after generation, in which we had no choice, and that one could not become a monarch of Great Britain unless they were the eldest Protestant Christian son of a monarch of Great Britain. And if there were no sons, then of course the eldest Protestant Christian daughter, although the French would never allow that, would they?
No,
they would not allow that.
No.
We were also governed by their particular parliament, one half of which is hereditary, the House of Peers, to which you referred earlier. One cannot become a member of the House of Peers unless they are the eldest Protestant Christian son of a member of the House of Peers, those few families that own the greatest amount of land throughout all of the kingdom of Great Britain. And then my point, we were also governed by their church, the Church of England. Now, in Virginia, the majority of our sister colonies, particularly Rhode Island and the Providence Plantations, New York and Pennsylvania, you were free to hold a religious opinion as you should choose, but all of us had to pay a tax to the support of the Church of England. Our tithing was required by us all. And in Virginia, if you refused to pay your tax, you were fined. If you refused to pay your fine, you were thrown into jail. You recollect, Chief Justice, before the American Revolution began, our jails in Virginia began to be filled with Baptists. Remember that?
Yes.
They came down from the north preaching the freedom called religion. So, sir, forgetting one of the principles of the initial settlement of North America on behalf of religious liberty, so many people seeking an asylum here simply to hold their religious opinion as they choose in order to get away from the coercions of monarchical governments coercing them to furnish contributions of money or to attend to a particular church. Here, in time, they were subject. It is not a separation of church and state that was intended. Rather, and that means, of course, a separating of religion from our lives, from the lives of those we elect to govern. Rather distinctly, a separation between church and state. A separation between the civil authority and the ecclesiastical authority, thereby allowing more freedom for both than has ever been known in human history. What is the duty of the civil authority? To pronounce religious opinions? Citizens. What has that led to throughout the history of man but hypocrisy, meanness, and bloodshed? but more freedom for the civil authority to attend to its duty, which I pronounced earlier, simply to protect us from injury by one and the other. How many Catholics burned at the stake by Protestants and vice versa? Is that the purity of Christianity? So if you will, sir, it is the separation between church and state that absolutely is ensured in our First Amendment, that the Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. And if any has a question with that, Article 6, the third paragraph, there shall be no religious test for office. So I can assure you, sir, that it is vice versa in kind with our Constitution, that government shall not impose itself in any church, nor any church impose itself in our government.
If I understand the President properly, he would hope for a free and full flourishing of religion expressed privately by individuals in society, so that a virtuous people seeking virtue through the religions of their choice can be fully fitted for the responsibilities of self-government.
Well, you would not think government is going to instill virtue, now do you?
Well, that is the point I take from your comments, that religion should be sufficiently strong so as not to require subsidy from the government.
Precisely, and where
And
is
that
it?
government should be sufficiently free of any particular opinions to not require the direct assistance of an organized and chosen denomination. Yes. The old alliance of the cross and of the crown in the colonial days has been severed, as it were, and perhaps to the betterment of religion as well as free and full government here. And I would only add one other thing, because Mr. Jefferson is an acknowledged authority on promoting religious freedom in public society. You would not wish for freedom, you don't wish freedom from religion.
That's what I said. It's not,
yes, exactly.
It's not a separation of church and state, it's a separation between. That is exactly what, well, this is not generally known, but I believe you are well aware that Baptist preachers in Danbury, Connecticut, wrote me a letter. It was my second year of my first administration, asking my opinion as Chief Magistrate whether the Constitution of the United States supersedes the Constitution of Connecticut. The reason being that in Connecticut, as you know, the Congregationalist Church was still alive with the civil authority. So the Baptist preachers, of course, were asking their president whether they still had to pay a tax to the support of the Congregationalist Church and Constitution, through their Constitution, even to purchase a license in order to be married from the Congregationalist Church.
The Baptists have a great aversion to purchasing licenses of any kind. That's what got them thrown into prison before the revolution.
Precisely.
Not having a license to preach. But I would add one more thing, perhaps, and other questions may be forthcoming. I also must salute, in addition to Mr. Jefferson, the very able pen of Mr. George Mason, assisted in committee by James Madison in coming up with the Virginia Declaration of Rights a few weeks before you penned the American Declaration of Independence. And there in the Virginia Declaration of Rights, you see that the concept of freedom of religion in public life was enshrined there. And I've always wondered, didn't you have perhaps a copy of Mr. Mason's declaration available to you?
There you are, trying to accuse me of plagiarism once more.
Well, it wouldn't have been plagiarism.
As I have written, I did not refer to one book, one pamphlet, or one individual in drafting our Declaration of American Independence. And if you will, a further correction. I have never written freedom of religion. I have written distinctly freedom for religion. Remember, that was the title of the committee formed to receive the growing number of petitions from the Baptists.
Yes, the Statute of Virginia for religious freedom. I read it, sir.
Thank you. We say, and you said, that all men are created equal. And yet, women, people of color, Catholics, those who didn't own property, really, in a sense, were treated as second-class citizens by being denied the vote. How do you square that?
Well, Mr. Mason, and I'll be brief here, that will give you some comfort, I'm sure. But Mr. Mason, in his Declaration of Rights, addressed that rather difficult problem. by saying that all men, and he included both genders in that statement, that all men were created equal when they first entered into a state of society, which is to say at birth, but that the norms, customs, and laws of society begin to separate them out. Is that not fair?
Yes, that is well, and that was the opinion of Mr. Webb, under whom we both read law. And yes, it is not the fact, and they understood me well in the Continental Congress, it is not the presumption, rather than fact, that we are all born equal in face and form. And I can only assume that the ladies there are the better off for not looking like me in their physiognomy, and I'm happy to that extent. We are not born equal in mental capacity. Some of us have minds the sharper, others have to take their time. But my question unto the people, are we all born free in nature, as the flora and the fauna? Do we not all come into this life free? Is that not the principle and the foundation of the laws of nature and nature's God? Of course it is. As you heard the Chief Justice remark, it is not the laws of nature. It is the laws of man. That is what we are. And yes, sir, that statement in our Declaration of American Independence, in the very beginning, stating the philosophy of this new world order, as the Romans would say, novus ordo seclorum, a new order of the ages, is founded. It is planted and secured in recognition all mankind are created free. We are a family of man across this globe, and that therefore there ought to be equal and exact justice.
Thank you. Would you, either of you, ever consider term limits for any of the offices of government? President, Supreme Court Justice, Senator, Congressman, would you consider that they should only be allowed to hold that office for so many years?
I am interested
for
in that.
Supreme Court justices, no matter
Well,
what.
now, I would have to review the records to be certain of it, but my thinking is, my assumptions, my reflecting back on the changes on the court in the time I've been on the court, I suspect that in any given case, a federal justice will probably be not on the bench for more than perhaps 8 years or 10 years at the most, because of death or resignation or illness. The Jeffersonian administration has seen fit to plague all the sitting justices of the Supreme Court with onerous additional duties to ride circuit throughout the nation in various districts, which is wearing out the health of some of the elder veterans.
And that will be rectified as the country expands to the west. We shall have new judicial districts to be created therefrom.
Oh, that's reassuring. And one thing I would like to ask you, General Washington, the father of our country, the sword of our revolution, a virtuous man, he has set not a written limitation, but by the power of his example, the idea that no one man should serve more than 2 terms as president. Now, under the written Constitution as it was ratified and ordained, there are no term limits on the federal executive. But I see that Mr. Washington has created a powerful example of if a man is elected to a 2nd term, he would decline a 3rd. And I was very curious to know, having sworn you in twice now with the oath to be the President of the United States, would you be willing to observe General Washington's very productive maxim and example?
In other words,
refuse to run for a 3rd term?
In other
as I
words,
might dare to hope.
if it were the will of the people that I should serve a 3rd term, and that appears to be most likely, for though my first election was rather a trauma, was it not, for our nation, let alone myself, I barely eked by in the final votes. The second election,
Which in fact has not the strange and complicated circumstances of the election of 1800 led to the 12th Amendment to our federal Constitution to prevent such political
absolutely, yes.
misadventures.
The conundrum with the presidential election of 1800 citizens, the fact that it was not immediate. There was no victim when the electoral votes arrived in Washington City. They had to be there by the first week in February. And imagine who opened the electoral votes before the Senate. one of the candidates, because as Vice President of the United States at the time, I was President of the Senate, and thereby to reveal not a victory but a tie, not between President Adams and another, so thereby, sir, President Adams only served one 4-year term as president. The tie was 73 electoral votes each for Aaron Burr and Thomas Jefferson. And for many days, our nation did not know who would be the next president.
Weeks.
Yes, could you ever imagine such a thing happening in our history? And mind you, we did follow the Constitution, did we not?
We did.
Which says in such a conundrum, the election continues, and it goes where? To the House, that body elected by whom? But the good Lord, citizens, could you ever imagine in such a conundrum the election should go to the judiciary?
We would not accept it. But we understand.
Can you trust them, is what I say in that regard. So my point being,
I would say this, that the Constitution does provide for the impeachment of high elected officials. And should a president ever be impeached for high crimes or misdemeanors, then the House would have to do the impeachment. And then the trial would be heard in the Senate. Now, for ordinary purposes, the Senate can try a federal official and find them guilty or not, and remove them from office and prescribe that they have no ability to serve in future federal office. But I notice the Constitution is explicit that in the case that a president should be impeached by the House and a trial should be conducted by the U.S. Senate, that trial would be presided over by the Chief Justice of the United States.
and may I remind you, a justice may be removed from the bench as well.
Indeed, by impeachment. Ask certain justices in Pennsylvania and New Hampshire whether or not impeachment is an empty scarecrow, because they were taken off the bench by that process.
To answer the Chief Justice's question as to whether I would serve a third term, I will stand upon the precedents already set by His Excellency General Washington. A gentleman's agreement, though it is not in our Constitution.
Thank you. Am I right?
That is good of you, sir.
Well, I thought it would be clear.
I will do something you have been wanting to do. Let's shake on that, sir. In public, sir. He will decline a third term, for which I give you my unlimited gratitude, sir.
And I assure you, I will keep my promise.
I think that if we go back to look at the Articles of Confederation and the meeting that you had in Philadelphia, you were there, I believe, to fix that document, a perpetual document. And instead, you eliminated it, you threw it out. Is that legal, in your opinions?
Well, I might offer a few remarks, and I know you would add your own remarks as well.
Well, I was not there, Mr. Chief Justice.
Nor I. It is fair to say that neither one of us were present at Philadelphia. You were at a very great remove on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean in Paris.
But I do believe we understood that the convention was being held in order to improve upon the Articles of Confederation.
But not replace.
Well, to improve.
It was a most effectual improvement over the old Articles.
It was a most effectual. I would agree with Justice Marshall. I think if you were to consider that the old document, the old articles were cast aside, and a more secure and firm constitution was in its place, yes, then perhaps it was cast aside. But that's the right of the representatives of the people following their will to impeach them.
As to the legality of our federal Constitution, I would ask this question. I would ask it of the President. Does the American Declaration of Independence reflect the will of the people? This is an easy question, sir.
I did not want to make my answer so complicated that you might not understand it. Our Declaration of American Independence contains nothing new or original. It was not the business of the 5 men appointed by President Hancock to draft the Declaration to come up with anything new. Everything in our Declaration has already been written, it has already been argued, it has already been debated. You may find it in the elementary works of public right, the works of Aristotle, Cicero, Algernon, Sidney, John Locke, Adam Smith, Those authors and their works, I presume each and every one of you are well familiar with and revisit every day, correct? Of course not.
And let us not forget the letters of Cicero. Those are highly instructive. I recommend those to my grandchildren.
Indeed, but the point is, lest we forget, in 1776, the average American could not even read. Our Declaration was written in order to be read. It follows a dramatic cadence to lift the human spirit to a noble sentiment of what man can accomplish in collaboration with his fellow man for the improvement of the condition of mankind.
Wonderful. Am I to understand then that the Declaration does reflect the will of the people?
It certainly does
Oh,
reflect.
thank you, sir. Now on to my point, if I may. If the Declaration...
Beware this twistification.
Oh, this will be abundantly clear. I think we are agreed that the Declaration of Independence reflects and embodies the will of the people because of the manner in which it was created. Delegates representing the people of the various states gathered in Philadelphia in the state capitol building of Philadelphia in a particular room, and full and fair deliberation led to the decision for independence. 2 days later, that decision was documented by the action of Congress, reflecting, I think, the will of the people by their chosen representatives. Then, so too, by a precisely similar logic, can we fully accept the legitimacy and legality of the United States Constitution as the will of the people. For deputies were chosen. They were assembled in the same city. They were assembled in the same building. They were assembled in the same room. And some of the individuals were the same. And they deliberated and they created a federal constitution with this additional support and verification that it reflected the will of the people. Unlike the Declaration of Independence, which was then signed as a fait accompli and copies kindly provided to the various states, the document, the federal constitution, was submitted to the people at large, who then chose their delegates to assemble in the various state capitals to reflect upon and either endorse or refute the federal constitution. So, in the same manner that the Declaration embodies the will of the people and is a legitimate state paper, and a masterful one, I may say, so too, and even more so, should we venerate the United States Constitution as an authentic act and reflection of the will of the people.
With one exception, Mr. Chief Justice, for I have seen indeed your tactic and strategy upon this moment. With one exception, that the Declaration of our American independence pronounces to the rest of the world what we hold to be the inherent rights throughout the family of man. Rights that are given to mankind, not by any government, not by any ruler, rights that are given to the family of man by nature and nature's God. That philosophy, with the grievances of people should ever be wary, could occur amongst them. They are listed right there, the second body of the document, and finally the confirmation that this recognition, this idea of what is self-evident throughout the family of man has brought forth the creation of our remarkable nation, is thereby protected and defended by our Constitution of the United States, correct? Through the will of the people in order to form their own government. Whatever is not in the Constitution is still reserved unto the people or to the states, with the one exception that if that is all it was, it would have only been relevant to the white male 21 years of age or older who is a freeholder, initially Protestant Christian. But rather that our system of government and our Constitution grows as we grow as a people through the process of amendment and proper representation of who the people are as they see themselves.
Guided by the actual experience that we gain. Yes, of course.
Thank you, gentlemen. And we have one final question, and then if you'd like to take a few moments after that to kind of summarize your thoughts, you can. But this final question, we start out with this question to you. Should the federal law supersede state law, can a few consensus judgments be trumpeting the will of the people? In this regard, is the Supreme Court above the law?
No, it is fully understood by the court that our written Constitution is intended just as much for the guidance of the court as it is for the guidance of the president or the guidance of the legislative branch. I fully subscribe to the idea that all three branches, distinct and separate now under our written Constitution, are subservient to the Constitution itself. It prescribes the limits under which this compound republic should function. So no, no elected member of the executive, no elected member of the legislative, no appointed member of the Supreme Court should consider themselves above or beyond our written Constitution. I would go further and say this much, that the example of a written Constitution is the best advance on political activities and science that America has given by way of example to the rest of the world. And I think the rest of the world should notice it and imitate the practice of a written Constitution, though for different nations the particulars may vary, as clothing would vary for different particular people. But it is a gift that our Constitution is written down, because if you go to the British people and ask them to produce a copy of their vaunted British Constitution, or if you go to any archive of a government nature in Great Britain, if you go to the House of Commons or the House of Lords and demand to see a copy of the British Constitution, there will be nothing there, for it has never been written down.
I would say that without question, as is stated in our Constitution, it is the law of the land. What is in our Constitution is the law throughout all the states. Now, does that mean that it is going to subject what has been the law of a particular state or experience of the people to the extent that they be denied entirely the opportunity to improve or make for a greater or more universal representation of that law for their general safety and defense? Absolutely not. And this was precisely meant by my answer to the Baptist preachers in Danbury, Connecticut. That yes, they were subjected to the Constitution of Connecticut and the association of the Congregationalist Church with the civil authority. But I, as chief executive of this nation, took an oath to protect and defend the Constitution of these United States. Not only Connecticut.
To uphold, protect.
To uphold, protect, and defend all. Yes, you administered to me.
Twice.
And so therefore, yes, the First Amendment, in my opinion, supersedes the Constitution of Connecticut. That is what I wrote to the Baptist preachers. Let them and their constituency and the people of Connecticut follow suit as they shall to alter their Constitution and amend it in order to fulfill that. But rest assured, I hope them as your president, not only of Connecticut, but all other states, no one more than myself would rather see a great wall of separation be built between church and state.
I would simply say that any ordinary statute, any ordinary law passed by a state legislature or by the federal legislative branch, which is in conflict with the United States Constitution, is not law. No ordinary law that cannot be reconciled to the federal Constitution can stand as law. The Constitution is, by Article 6, the supreme law of the land, any state laws notwithstanding.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. As you have probably noticed, these questions which came from the citizenry here were quite astute and probing, and you have some very educated people. Some of them may even been Catholics that asked you those questions. I hope that you don't mind that. Do you have a brief closing statement that you want to leave us with, or are we at your bedtimes? You decide.
I know, no matter what I will say, that the Chief Justice will seek to supersede it, and so he ought to, in that respect, as I had the final say before we engaged in our dialogue tonight. Sir, I am happy to know that perhaps many Catholics will put forth their curiosities and questions here this evening, for that in itself shows the security of our Constitution, particularly our First Amendment. For many who stood in the pulpits of churches in New England and chastised me, hurled their heresies against me, referring to me as a blasphemer and an infidel, simply because I was the author of the Statute of Virginia for religious freedom, which was the impetus for our First Amendment. Were they not somewhat struck and provoked when in 1803, through the success of the purchase not only of the island of New Orleans and the control of the Mississippi River, one of the largest arteries of commerce upon this globe, but well over 830,000 square miles west of the Mississippi River, was not New England, was not our nation and the rest of the world struck by the fact we doubled, some say tripled, the size of our nation with a Catholic country? And the more so were they not astounded when in 1812 we brought into our fold, our union, our 18th state, Louisiana, a Catholic state, and with its own system of laws initiated by a dictator, the Napoleonic Code, that they might abide as they had been accustomed and seek the further evolution of their laws for generations yet unborn as they should choose. My final statement is to recall that during the spring of 1804, I received a letter from the Mother Abbess of the Ursuline Academy in New Orleans, Sister Maria Teresa Farrell, I believe her name. She inquired of the President of the United States, after being grateful that they were now in the fold of our nation, whether her order, whether her school, whether her convent would be subjected to paying taxes to our government. And secondly, whether they were still free to conduct their religion, attend to their school, and make their choice as young ladies to enter the nunnery. I wrote back to her to assure her that no, they would not pay any taxes as any other congregation or religion has to pay a tax in our nation or our territories. But the furthermore, I said, Madam, rest you assured, you, your young ladies, your school, your convent, and your religion has never been more free than it is now to be conducted here in our United States of America. You know, they tell me that my letter remains framed and hanging on the wall of the office of Mother Abbess of the Ursuline Academy in New Orleans. I hope you will understand that, Mr. Chief Justice, as my interest and desire truly to continue to uphold our Constitution for the benefit of the people as they have been, as they are, and will continue to be in the future.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Chief Justice.
I would close with a few remarks on the purchase of Louisiana and on the establishment of a federal judiciary. As to the acquisition of Louisiana, there was considerable suspense for some time whether or not President Jefferson would permit himself to seize upon so obvious an opportunity to expand an empire of liberty with, how did you say, blessings for unborn millions?
To the 100,000th generations yet unborn.
And it was difficult for Mr. Jefferson to act at once upon this glorious opportunity because he could not find an explicit delegation of such a power for him so to act in the Constitution itself. But at the same time, there was no prohibition against such an action. And as Thomas Paine put it, acquiring Louisiana under our written Constitution was well within the morality of the U.S. Constitution. It certainly respected and reflected the existence of our Fourth Amendment, which contemplates how Congress may take in new territory and manage that territory and end up guaranteeing a republican form of government as our nation grows. So there was nothing intrinsic in the Constitution to prevent such an action. And as I believe I am reliably informed, you were at length successfully advised by that enlightened advocate of a more perfect union and that supporter of an energetic federal government, Mr. Madison, as your Secretary of State, to just buy the Louisiana Territory and get on with it. Yes. Thank goodness you showed the ability to act within the spirit of the Constitution for an end so directly purposed for the benefit of the people. Yes. As to the federal judiciary, I'm thinking now of the text of the preamble to our federal Constitution. It says that we, the people, in order to form a more perfect union. This implies that a previous effort had been made, and that previous effort, as has been discussed, was the Articles of Confederation. Now, much has been said about the word perpetual in the Articles of Confederation. And to give you a legal understanding of that, most treaties or alliances will have a term for which they are valid, a time after which they have expired. If you do not put in an expiration time or period within a written document, it is deemed to be perpetual until at such particular time deemed best it might end. So that was not a barrier, the word perpetual, to removing the Articles of Confederation and replacing them most effectively with a national government that could speak for the American people. Those are phrases I do not find odious. And when we go beyond a more perfect union, the next clause says, and establish justice. Not to establish a more perfect justice, but to establish justice. Because previous to our Constitution, not only did we lack an energetic executive branch, we had no national judiciary to look after national interests. And so, at length, we established an upright federal judiciary by means of the Constitution and a capable executive branch that might, with respect, represent America abroad to foreign nations. And therefore, that would redound to our greater national security if we are respected by foreign nations, and it would redound to our future prosperity for ourselves and our children if we could enter into meaningful international treaties that would be respected on both sides, establish justice, and provide our posterity with the blessings of liberty. What a magnificent preamble to an unlimited era of promise for a people. And I will even close by quoting Mr. Jefferson, as I understand he has said, because I feel the full force and effect of your quotation. Whenever the people are well informed, they can be trusted with their own government. Practice wisdom, practice temperance, practice justice. Yes, the essential ingredients as handed down by classical authority, those things that make for good character. And I add fortitude. Those are the essentials. We both, I dare to hope, thank all of these people for coming here in an effort to be well informed, so that we may all look forward to the future of a representative democracy in a compound republic. Thank you for attending upon us.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for listening with us tonight, for sharing your views as to Ladies and gentlemen, if you'd let Mr. Chief Justice and Mr. President exit the auditorium, maybe freshen up a little bit, they will be out in the lobby available to you to have your picture taken with them. So just remain in your seats for a moment, gentlemen, if you would. Thank you, and we'll see you out in the lobby. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, upon exiting the auditorium, please stop by to get your photograph.